Get out! Harold Blake's voice shook the 42nd floor boardroom as his own daughter stood there in a janitor's uniform, surrounded by the workers she'd spent 6 months secretly living among. All of you! But Cassandra wasn't moving. Because the folder in her hands contained 6 months of recorded conversations, stolen memos, and documented proof that would destroy every executive in that room. They had no idea that their boss's daughter had been emptying their trash, cleaning their offices, and collecting evidence of the biggest corporate scandal in company history. And she was about to expose it all. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's rewind to where this all began. 6 months earlier, Cassandra Blake pressed her manicured fingertips against the cold glass of the 42nd floor, watching the ant-like people scramble across 5th Avenue below. At 28, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that stopped conversations. Rich brown skin that seemed to glow from within, expressive dark eyes framed by thick lashes, and a cascade of natural curls that she usually kept in a professional low bun. Today she wore a tailored emerald blazer that complemented her complexion perfectly, paired with charcoal slacks that screamed expensive even without visible labels. The quarterly reports show another 12% increase. Her father's voice drifted from behind his massive oak desk, barely acknowledging her presence. Harold Blake, an imposing man in his late 50s with silver temples and skin weathered by decades of corporate battles, shuffled through papers without looking up. Though I suppose those numbers mean little to someone who's never worked a real day. The words hit like ice water. Cassandra turned from the window, her reflection ghostly against the afternoon sky. I have my MBA from Wharton, Dad. I've been trying to contribute meaningfully to this company for 3 years. Meaningfully. Harold's laugh was sharp, cutting. Attending charity galas and ribbon cuttings isn't meaningful work, sweetheart. This business requires grit, understanding of real people, real problems. He finally looked up, his gray eyes dismissive. You've lived in a bubble your entire life. Here we go again, Cassandra thought, her stomach tightening with familiar frustration. She'd heard variations of this speech countless times. The unspoken subtext hung heavy in the air, that despite being his only child and heir to a company worth $3.2 billion, she somehow wasn't worthy of real responsibility or respect. The door opened, and Thomas Crawford strode in without knocking. The chief financial officer was a thin man with pale skin and nervous energy, always carrying himself like he owned the place despite being an employee. His gray suit was wrinkled, his tie askew. Harold, we need to discuss the Newark facility situation, Thomas said, then noticed Cassandra. His expression shifted to barely concealed annoyance. Oh, I didn't realize you were entertaining. Entertaining. As if she were some society friend dropping by for tea rather than the future owner of everything Thomas managed. What situation? Harold asked, his attention immediately shifting away from his daughter. Thomas glanced nervously at Cassandra. Perhaps we should speak privately. She can hear whatever you have to say, Harold replied, though his tone suggested he agreed with Thomas's hesitation. The workers at the Newark plant are complaining again. About conditions, overtime pay, the usual drama. Janet in HR thinks we should address their concerns, but honestly, Harold, these people don't understand business realities. Cassandra felt something cold settle in her chest. These people. Thomas barely glanced her way. The factory workers. Look, they're paid fairly for their skill level. If they want more money, they should have gotten better educations. The casual dismissal in his voice made Cassandra's hands clench. She'd grown up hearing similar comments at dinner parties and board meetings. The subtle dehumanization of the people who actually made the company's products, who showed up every day to jobs that kept Harold Blake's empire running. Maybe if we actually listened to their concerns, Cassandra began. Cassie, please, Harold interrupted, using the childhood nickname that made her feel small and powerless. Thomas, schedule a meeting with the plant supervisors. We'll handle this appropriately. We. Never including her in the we that made real decisions. Thomas nodded and left as abruptly as he'd entered. Harold returned to his papers, effectively dismissing his daughter without another word. Cassandra stood there for a long moment, invisible again in her own father's office. Through the glass walls, she could see other executives moving through the halls, mostly white men in expensive suits, occasionally nodding respectfully when they spotted Harold, but looking right through her as if she were furniture. "I'm going home," she said quietly. Harold grunted acknowledgement without looking up. Meanwhile, same day by 6:47 p.m., 43 miles away, Rosa Martinez pushed her cleaning cart down the dimly lit hallway of Blake Industries' Newark plant. At 35, she moved with the efficient grace of someone who'd spent 15 years perfecting the art of making herself invisible while seeing everything. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the standard-issue navy blue uniform that marked her as part of the vast, overlooked workforce that kept the company running. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floors. Rosa had been working the evening cleaning shift since her youngest started kindergarten, taking the job because it paid better than retail and didn't require perfect English, though her English was actually quite good. "Rosa, you missed a spot near the conference room," called Jerry Patterson, the night supervisor. He was a heavy-set man with thinning hair and a permanent scowl, the kind of person who seemed to enjoy the small amount of power his position gave him. "I'll get it," Rosa replied evenly, though she knew the spot was probably imaginary. Jerry liked to find fault, especially with the cleaning staff who couldn't easily fight back. As she pushed her cart toward the executive wing, Rosa passed the employee break room where a group of factory workers sat around a scarred table, their lunch break extending longer than it should. She recognized most of them: Antonio from packaging, Maria from quality control, Kenny from the loading dock. "They're talking about cutting overtime again," Antonio was saying, his voice tired. "My wife just had surgery. We need that overtime." "They don't care," Maria replied bitterly. "To them, we're just numbers on a spreadsheet. Expendable." Kenny, a young black man who'd started working at the plant straight out of high school, shook his head. "My mom worked for this company for 20 years before she retired. Says it used to be different. Used to be they cared about people." "That was before," Maria said. "Before the son took over day-to-day operations and everything became about maximizing profits." Rosa slowed her cart, pretending to organize her supplies while listening. She'd heard similar conversations dozens of times. Workers feeling forgotten, disrespected, struggling to make ends meet while the company posted record profits quarter after quarter. "You hear about the discrimination complaint Jennifer filed?" Antonio asked quietly. Kenny leaned forward. "What happened?" "She applied for that supervisor position in shipping. Had the most experience, best performance reviews. They gave it to some guy they hired from outside. White guy with half her experience." Antonio's voice dropped even lower. When she asked why, they told her she wasn't management material. "That's code," Maria said angrily. "That's code for you're not the right color." Rosa felt anger flash through her chest. She'd seen it herself: qualified workers passed over for promotions, their ideas dismissed in meetings, their concerns brushed aside. The company talked about diversity in their glossy annual reports, but down here in the actual workplace, things looked very different. "Someone should tell the Blake family what's really happening," Kenny said. "Maybe they don't know." Maria laughed harshly. "You think they care? Rich people like that, they live in a different world. They see us as machines, not people." Rosa continued down the hallway, their words echoing in her mind. She thought about her own daughter, bright and full of dreams, working hard in school because she believed education and effort would give her opportunities. But what if Maria was right? What if it didn't matter how hard you worked or how qualified you were, if the people making decisions would never see you as equal? The executive wing was quiet now, most of the managers having left for the day. Rosa unlocked the office doors one by one, cleaning spaces that cost more to furnish than she made in a year. The contrast wasn't lost on her: the leather chairs, polished wood, fresh flowers delivered daily, while downstairs the workers used a break room with mismatched furniture and a microwave that barely worked. As she emptied the waste basket in Thomas Crawford's office, a crumpled memo caught her eye. Without thinking, she smoothed it out and read: Newark facility complaints. Recommend minimal response. These workers are easily replaceable. Focus on maintaining profit margins rather than addressing non-essential concerns about working conditions. Rosa stared at the paper, her hands trembling slightly. Easily replaceable. That's how they saw people like her, like Antonio and Maria and Kenny. Not as human beings with families and dreams and dignity, but as disposable parts in their money-making machine. She folded the memo carefully and slipped it into her pocket, though she wasn't sure why. Back in Midtown, that same evening, 9:15 p.m., Cassandra sat in her spacious living room, surrounded by luxury that felt increasingly hollow. Her apartment was beautiful, hardwood floors, contemporary art, a view of Central Park, but tonight it felt like a gilded cage. She'd ordered Thai food she didn't eat and opened a bottle of wine she barely touched. Her phone buzzed with text messages from friends asking about weekend plans, charity events, gallery openings. The same cycle of privileged social activities that filled her calendar but left her feeling empty. What am I actually contributing to the world? She wondered, not for the first time. She had all the advantages anyone could want: wealth, education, connections, but somehow felt more powerless than ever. Her father's words replayed in her mind: "You've lived in a bubble your entire life." Maybe he was right. Maybe she didn't understand real people or real problems. But how could she learn if she was never allowed to try, never given real responsibility, never trusted with anything meaningful? A memory surfaced from college. Her roommate Amy, who'd worked 2 jobs to pay for school and talked about her mother's struggles as a hotel housekeeper. Amy had respected her mother's work, seen dignity in it, understood how hard it was to make an honest living doing necessary but invisible labor. Invisible labor. An idea began forming in Cassandra's mind, wild and probably impossible, but for the first time in months, she felt a spark of genuine excitement. What if she stopped trying to prove herself from the top down? What if she learned about her father's company from the bottom up, the way her employees experienced it every day? What if she became invisible by choice, to finally see what was really happening in the empire she was supposed to inherit? 2 weeks later, Cassandra stood outside the HR office, her heart hammering against her ribs. 2 weeks of meticulous planning had led to this moment. She'd spent countless hours researching how to create a believable false identity, studying working-class mannerisms, and even taking a crash course in basic cleaning techniques from YouTube videos. Gone was the polished executive. In her place stood Nina Parker, a woman who looked remarkably similar to Cassandra but transformed by careful choices. Her natural curls were pulled into a simple ponytail secured with a plain elastic band. She wore no makeup except a touch of lip balm, and her usual designer clothes had been replaced by worn jeans, white sneakers from a discount store, and a faded blue hoodie. Most importantly, she'd practiced speaking differently, softening her precise diction into something more natural and less privileged. The transformation was so complete that she'd tested it by walking through the lobby of her own building. Security guards who'd seen her hundreds of times looked right through her. "You hear about the cleaning position?" asked Janet Murphy, the HR director, barely glancing up from her computer screen. Janet was a tired-looking woman in her 50s with graying hair and the demeanor of someone who'd processed thousands of job applications. "Yes, ma'am," Cassandra replied, keeping her voice steady despite her nerves. "I saw the posting online." Janet finally looked at her, taking in the modest appearance and references Cassandra had carefully fabricated. Previous cleaning experience? Worked for a cleaning service in Queens for 2 years. Hotels mostly. The lie came surprisingly easily. She'd rehearsed this story until it felt real. "Why'd you leave?" Cassandra had prepared for this question. "Company downsized. They kept the workers who'd been there longer." Janet nodded, unsurprised. "This is evening shift work. 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., Monday through Friday. $15 an hour to start. You'll be working primarily at our Newark facility, some rotation to other locations as needed. Can you handle that? $15 an hour." Cassandra tried not to show her shock. She spent more than that on a single coffee at her usual cafe. "Yes, that works for me." "You have reliable transportation?" Another hurdle she'd anticipated. "I take the bus, but I'm always on time." "Good. Drug test is mandatory. Background check will take a few days." Assuming everything comes back clean, you can start this Friday. Janet handed her a clipboard with forms. Fill these out completely. Any questions? Cassandra shook her head, accepting the papers with hands that trembled slightly. Thank you for this opportunity. Janet was already turning back to her computer. Rosa Martinez will be your supervisor. She'll show you the ropes. On Friday, April 5, 2024, 15 minutes before her first shift, Cassandra sat in her car in the employee parking lot, staring at the imposing brick building that housed part of her father's empire. From this angle, it looked different than it did in the glossy corporate brochures. The windows were grimy, the parking lot full of potholes, and the employee entrance was marked only by a small, faded sign. She'd never entered this building through the employee entrance before. During her few official visits, she'd been escorted through the executive entrance, given sanitized tours that showed only what management wanted visitors to see. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed the small backpack she'd bought specifically for this role and walked toward the building. The security guard, an older black man with kind eyes, barely glanced at her ID badge. "First day?" he asked, noting her nervous energy. "Yes, sir. You'll do fine. Rosa's good people. She'll take care of you." Cassandra followed the signs to the custodial office, a small room filled with cleaning supplies and time clocks. Rosa Martinez was waiting, wearing the same navy uniform Cassandra had been issued. "You must be Nina," Rosa said, extending her hand. "I'm Rosa. Welcome to the team." Up close, Rosa had warm brown eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work. There was something instantly trustworthy about her, a maternal quality that made Cassandra feel both welcomed and guilty about her deception. "Thank you for training me," Cassandra said. "I really need this job." Rosa studied her for a moment. "You seem nervous." "Don't worry. The work isn't complicated, but it is important. People notice when things aren't clean, even if they don't notice when they are." She handed Cassandra a cart loaded with supplies. "We'll start with the administrative floors, work our way down. I'll show you the routine, then you can take the executive wing on your own." As they walked through the hallways, Rosa pointed out details Cassandra had never noticed during her previous visits. The water stains on the ceiling tiles, the outdated equipment, the break room with its mismatched chairs and flickering lights. "How long have you worked here?" Cassandra asked as they began cleaning the first office. 15 years in May," Rosa replied, efficiently dusting a desk. "Started when my youngest was little. Needed a job with benefits." "Do you like it?" Rosa paused, considering the question carefully. "The work is honest. The pay, well, it keeps food on the table. But things have changed over the years. Used to feel like the company cared about all its workers, not just the ones in suits." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Rosa demonstrating the proper way to clean computer screens and empty trash cans. Cassandra found herself genuinely interested in learning the techniques, wanting to do the job well. "Rosa, can I ask you something?" Cassandra said as they moved to the next office. "Of course. That woman Jennifer who applied for the supervisor position. What really happened there?" Rosa's expression darkened. "You heard about that already?" Some of the workers were talking about it in the break room. Rosa looked around to make sure they were alone, then spoke quietly. "Jennifer is one of the hardest workers I know. Been here 8 years, knows the shipping department inside and out. When that position opened up, she was the obvious choice. But they didn't pick her. They hired some guy from outside. Nice enough person, I'm sure, but he doesn't know our systems, doesn't understand our procedures. Jennifer had to train him." Rosa's voice carried quiet anger. When she asked HR why she wasn't considered, they said she needed more leadership experience. But how do you get leadership experience if no one ever gives you the chance to lead? Cassandra felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay in character. "That doesn't seem fair." "Fair?" Rosa laughed bitterly. "Honey, fair is a word that doesn't apply much around here, at least not for people who look like us." They continued working, but Rosa's words echoed in Cassandra's mind. She'd grown up believing her father was a fair man, a good employer. But from down here, the view looked very different. 2 hours later, alone in the executive offices for the first time as Nina Parker, Cassandra felt like she was seeing her father's company through new eyes. These were the same offices she'd visited countless times, but now she noticed details that had been invisible to her before. In Thomas Crawford's office, she found documents carelessly left on his desk. Financial reports showing record profits while employee wages had remained stagnant for 3 years. A memo about cost reduction strategies that included eliminating employee bonuses and reducing healthcare contributions. But it was in the office of Andrew Holbrook, the head of operations, where she made her first truly shocking discovery. Hidden under a stack of quarterly reports was a handwritten note. Make sure the Newark complaints don't reach Harold directly. Handle through usual channels. These workers need to understand their place. Cassandra stared at the note, her hands shaking. Her father wasn't even seeing the employee complaints. They were being filtered out, dismissed by executives who viewed workers as problems to be managed rather than people to be respected. She photographed the note with her phone, then carefully replaced it exactly where she'd found it. As she continued cleaning, she began to understand that her invisible position gave her unprecedented access to information. Executives spoke freely around cleaning staff, left sensitive documents unguarded, conducted private conversations as if the janitors were furniture. During her dinner break, Cassandra sat with a group of second-shift workers. Kenny, the young man Rosa had mentioned, was there along with several others she was meeting for the first time. Nina's new, Rosa announced. First week. Welcome to the salt mines, said Patricia, a woman in her 40s who worked in quality control. Hope you're not expecting to get rich here. I just need steady work, Cassandra replied honestly. Well, you picked the right place for steady, Kenny said with dark humor. Steady low pay, steady disrespect, steady wondering if tomorrow's the day they decide you're too expensive to keep around. It's not that bad, Rosa said gently, though her tone suggested she didn't quite believe it herself. Isn't it? Patricia pulled out her phone and showed them a news article. Blake Industries just announced their biggest profit year ever. Meanwhile, my daughter needs new school clothes and I'm trying to decide between that and getting my car fixed. Cassandra stared at the article, recognizing the photo of her father shaking hands with city officials. The headline read, Blake Industries reports 400% increase in annual profits. 400% increase. She'd seen those numbers in the quarterly reports, but sitting here with people who couldn't afford basic necessities while her father celebrated record profits, the numbers took on a different meaning entirely. The rich get richer, Kenny said quietly. And the rest of us just get older. As Cassandra listened to their stories, their struggles, their quiet dignity in the face of systematic disrespect, she felt something fundamental shifting inside her. This wasn't just about proving herself to her father anymore. This was about justice, about basic human dignity, about the responsibility that came with power. She was going to document everything. Every injustice, every discriminatory practice, every example of the callous disregard for the people who made her family's wealth possible. And when she had enough evidence, she was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. Cassandra sat across from her father in his office, struggling to maintain her composed exterior while the weight of everything she'd witnessed pressed against her chest. She'd just finished her second week as Nina Parker, and the contrast between these two worlds was becoming unbearable. You seem distracted lately, Harold said, signing documents without looking up. The Pemberton Charity Gala is next week. I need you focused and presentable. Presentable. The word stung differently now. She thought about Rosa working 15-hour shifts to cover for a coworker whose child was sick, about Kenny taking on extra duties without extra pay because he was afraid to complain, about Patricia skipping lunch to save money for her daughter's school supplies. Dad, I've been thinking about the Newark facility, Cassandra said carefully. Maybe we should visit more often, check in on operations. Harold's pen stopped moving. Why this sudden interest in manufacturing? It's our biggest facility. Shouldn't we understand how it runs? That's what managers are for, Cassie. Thomas and Andrew handle day-to-day operations. I trust their judgment. Trust their judgment. If only he knew what their judgment actually looked like. Over the past 2 weeks, Cassandra had collected a growing file of evidence. Memos about managing troublemakers, emails discussing ways to avoid giving raises, and recorded conversations where executives mocked employee concerns. But what if the managers aren't telling us everything? She pressed. Harold finally looked up, his expression annoyed. What's gotten into you? First you're asking about worker complaints. Now you're questioning my management team. This isn't like you. This isn't like you. The phrase hit her like a slap. He was right. The old Cassandra, the one who attended galas and ribbon cuttings, would never have questioned the corporate hierarchy. But Nina Parker had opened her eyes to realities the old Cassandra had been blind to. I just think we should be more involved, she said weakly. Involvement means understanding your role, Harold replied sternly. Your role is to represent this family with grace and dignity, not to second-guess experienced executives who've been running successful operations since before you were born. The dismissal was final. Cassandra left the office feeling more isolated than ever, caught between two worlds where she couldn't fully belong to either. As Nina Parker, Cassandra pushed her cart through the facility's main floor, where the actual manufacturing took place. The noise was overwhelming, machines humming, workers calling to each other over the din, the constant clatter of products moving down assembly lines. She'd never spent time on the production floor during her previous visits. Executives had always steered her toward offices and conference rooms, away from the reality of how her family's products were actually made. Nina! Rosa called out, approaching with a concerned expression. I need to warn you about something. They moved to a quieter corner near the loading docks. Rosa glanced around nervously before speaking. There's been talk among the supervisors, Rosa said quietly. They're planning layoffs. Big ones. Cassandra felt her stomach drop. When? Soon. Maybe next month. They're calling it operational efficiency, but we all know what that means. How many people? Nobody knows for sure, but word is it could be 30% of the workforce. Rosa's voice was strained. Some of these people have been here for decades. They have families, mortgages, kids in college. Cassandra thought about the profit reports she'd seen just that afternoon. Record earnings, and they were planning to cut jobs anyway. Not because they had to, but because it would make the numbers look even better to shareholders. Is there anything workers can do? Rosa laughed bitterly. Like what? File complaints? We've tried that. They disappear into some HR black hole. Start a union? They fired the last 3 people who even mentioned that word. What about going directly to Harold Blake? You think the big boss cares about people like us? Rosa shook her head. Rich people live in a different world, Nina. They see numbers on spreadsheets, not human faces. The irony was crushing. Rosa was talking about Cassandra's own father, describing him as someone who didn't care about his workers. And based on everything Cassandra had witnessed, Rosa wasn't wrong. Cassandra was cleaning the main conference room when she heard voices approaching. Quickly, she moved her cart to the far corner and began dusting shelves, making herself invisible as she'd learned to do. Thomas Crawford entered with Andrew Holbrook and 2 other executives she recognized but had never formally met. They were carrying files and speaking in hushed tones. The layoff plan is solid, Andrew was saying. We target the older workers first. Higher salaries, more expensive healthcare costs. What about performance reviews? Asked Rebecca Martinez, the head of human resources. We can adjust those as needed, Thomas replied coldly. Document some performance issues. Create a paper trail. Makes it look like merit-based decisions rather than cost-cutting. Cassandra continued dusting, her hands trembling with rage. They were planning to destroy people's lives and create false documentation to justify it. What if workers complain? Asked the 4th executive, someone from legal. Same as always, Andrew said. We handle complaints internally, document that we investigated thoroughly, then file them away. As long as Harold doesn't get involved directly, we have full discretion. He's been asking more questions lately, Thomas noted. His daughter's been putting ideas in his head about visiting facilities more often. Andrew laughed. Cassandra? Please. She's never worked a real day in her life. Give her a month and she'll be back to planning charity events. The casual dismissal of her concerns, the complete misunderstanding of who she was and what she was capable of, filled Cassandra with cold fury. They saw her as weak, irrelevant, a spoiled princess playing at being concerned about business. Still, we should be careful, Rebecca warned. Keep sensitive discussions away from the main offices. Agreed, Thomas said. Let's use my private office for future planning sessions. They gathered their papers and left, never having noticed the janitor in the corner who'd heard every word. Cassandra stood alone in the conference room, shaking with anger and determination. They thought she was weak. They thought she didn't understand real work or real problems. They thought they could destroy lives while hiding behind corporate double-talk and manufactured justifications. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Cassandra sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence she'd collected over the past 2 weeks. Photos of memos, recorded conversations on her phone, documented examples of discrimination and financial misconduct. The scope of what she'd uncovered was staggering. But as she organized the materials, doubt crept in. What was she really going to do with all this? March into her father's office and explain that she'd been working undercover as a janitor? He'd think she'd lost her mind. And then what? Even if she convinced him to listen, would he believe that his trusted executives were systematically exploiting workers? Would he care enough to do anything about it? Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her father's number. Cassie, I need you at the office, Harold said without preamble. We're having an emergency board meeting on Monday. Some investor concerns about operational costs. Operational costs. Code for the layoffs she'd heard about the night before. What kind of concerns? Nothing you need to worry about. Just be prepared to answer questions about our family's commitment to the company if anyone asks. After hanging up, Cassandra stared at her evidence file. Monday's board meeting wasn't about investor concerns. It was about finalizing the layoff plan, about putting the final touches on decisions that would devastate hundreds of families. She had a choice to make. She could return to being Cassandra Blake, the privileged daughter who attended meetings and smiled while others made the real decisions. She could file away her evidence and pretend she'd never seen what she'd seen. Or she could find a way to stop this. The old Cassandra might have chosen safety, might have convinced herself that she didn't have enough power to make a difference. But Nina Parker had shown her something the old Cassandra had never understood. Real power didn't come from privilege or position. It came from courage, from the willingness to stand up for what was right even when it was dangerous. She picked up her phone and called Rosa. Hi, it's Nina. I know it's your day off, but I need to ask you something important. That board meeting on Monday, do you know if there's a way for employees to attend? To have their voices heard. There was a long pause. Why do you ask? Cassandra took a deep breath. Because I think it's time someone told the truth about what's really happening here. Rosa Martinez lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a brick building that had seen better decades. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, and family photos covered every available surface. The scent of homemade soup filled the air, and children's laughter echoed from the courtyard below. Cassandra sat on Rosa's worn but comfortable couch, feeling more nervous than she had during any corporate presentation. She'd spent the entire drive from Manhattan rehearsing what she was going to say, but now, surrounded by the warmth of a real home built on honest work, the words seemed inadequate. You sounded upset on the phone, Rosa said, setting down 2 cups of coffee. What's going on? I need to tell you something, and I need your help, Cassandra began, her voice shaking slightly. But first, I need you to promise you'll hear me out completely before you react. Rosa's eyebrows raised with concern. Nina, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Cassandra took a deep breath. There was no way to ease into this. My real name isn't Nina Parker. It's Cassandra Blake. The coffee cup in Rosa's hand stopped halfway to her lips. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock and distant traffic. Blake, Rosa repeated slowly. As in Harold Blake. As in. He's my father. The cup clattered against the saucer as Rosa set it down with shaking hands. Her face cycled through confusion, shock, and then something that looked like betrayal. You're his daughter, Rosa said, her voice flat. You're the billionaire's daughter, and you've been pretending to be a janitor. Yes. Rosa stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Why? Is this some kind of game to you? Some rich girl playing dress-up to see how the other half lives? The hurt in Rosa's voice cut deep. No, it's not a game. I needed to understand what was really happening in my father's company. I needed to see the truth. The truth. Rosa spun around, her eyes flashing with anger. The truth is that people like me work ourselves to death while people like you decide our fate from ivory towers. The truth is that you've been lying to me for weeks. I know how this looks, but please listen. I've discovered things. Terrible things. The executives are planning massive layoffs. They're creating false performance reviews to justify firing people. They're stealing overtime pay and manipulating safety inspections. Rosa crossed her arms, her expression guarded. And what exactly do you plan to do about it? There's a board meeting tomorrow. I can expose everything, but I need your help. I need the workers to be there, to have their voices heard. You want us to crash your board meeting? I want you to demand the seat at the table you deserve, Cassandra said, standing and pulling out her phone. Look at this. She showed Rosa photos of the memos she'd found, recordings of executive conversations, documented evidence of the discrimination and financial misconduct. As Rosa scrolled through the evidence, her anger began to mix with something else. This is everything we suspected but could never prove, Rosa whispered. It's worse than you suspected. They're not just cutting jobs, they're systematically targeting older workers, minorities, anyone they think won't fight back. And they're doing it while the company posts record profits. Rosa sank back onto the couch, the weight of the evidence overwhelming. Why should I trust you? How do I know this isn't some elaborate setup? Cassandra sat beside her, careful to maintain some distance. Because I could have stayed in my comfortable office, attending charity galas and pretending everything was fine. Because I didn't have to spend 2 weeks emptying trash cans and scrubbing toilets to learn what I could have discovered through corporate reports. Because I'm risking everything, my relationship with my father, my inheritance, my entire future, to do what's right. Your inheritance, Rosa said bitterly. You're worried about losing money that you never worked for. You're right to be angry, Cassandra acknowledged. I do have privileges you'll never have. But that's exactly why I have to use them. I have access to that boardroom. I have the power to make executives listen. Without that access, this evidence is just files on a phone. Rosa was quiet for a long time, studying Cassandra's face. You really lived like us. Took the bus, ate convenience store sandwiches, worried about making rent. I worried about keeping my cover, Cassandra admitted. Which isn't the same thing as worrying about real survival. But I learned something important. The people working in that facility aren't just employees to me anymore. They're friends. They're Kenny, who's supporting his sick mother. They're Patricia, who's working double shifts to save for her daughter's college. They're you, who trusted me when I didn't deserve it. Rosa's expression softened slightly. What exactly are you proposing? The board meeting is at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Security will try to keep employees out, but I can get you inside. You, Kenny, Patricia, Antonio, Maria, anyone willing to speak truth to power. When the executives present their layoff plan, you'll be there to tell the real story. And then what? You think your father will just fire all his executives and give us raises? Cassandra met her eyes steadily. I think my father is a good man who's been getting bad information from people he trusts. But even if he's not, even if he chooses profits over people, at least the board will know the truth. At least there will be consequences. Rosa stood and walked to her kitchen window, looking out at the courtyard where children played on rusty swing sets. My daughter Isabel is 8 years old, she said quietly. She wants to be a teacher. I work 2 jobs so she can stay in a good school district, so she can have opportunities one never had. I know. If I do this, if I speak up in that meeting, they'll fire me. Blacklist me. I might never find another job. Cassandra joined her at the window. If you don't do this, They'll fire you anyway, along with 30% of the workforce. At least this way, you go down fighting. Rosa was quiet for several minutes, watching her daughter play below. Finally, she turned back to Cassandra. There's something you need to understand. These people we work with, they've been beaten down by this system for years. They've filed complaints that disappeared, made suggestions that were ignored, watched friends get fired for asking questions. They don't trust easily. I understand. No, you don't. Not really. When I tell them who you really are, some of them will see it as the ultimate betrayal. They'll think you were spying on them, gathering information to use against them. The possibility hadn't occurred to Cassandra, but she realized Rosa was right. What do you suggest? We call a meeting tonight. All the workers who've been talking about these problems. You tell them everything, who you are, what you've discovered, what you're proposing. And then you let them decide if they trust you enough to risk everything. Cassandra nodded. Okay. But Rosa, there's something else. The meeting has to be secret. If management finds out we're organizing, they'll move the board meeting or call security. This only works if we have the element of surprise. Rosa picked up her phone. I know a place. The community center on Garden Street has a room we can use. 7 o'clock tonight. As Rosa made calls, Cassandra felt the weight of what they were planning settle over her. In less than 24 hours, she would either help expose the biggest corporate scandal in her father's company's history, or she would destroy her life for nothing. But as she watched Rosa coordinate with coworkers, speaking in rapid Spanish and English, organizing people who had every reason to distrust authority, Cassandra realized something important. This wasn't about her anymore. This wasn't about proving herself to her father or finding her place in the world. This was about justice. This was about treating people with the dignity they deserved. And for the first time in her privileged life, she was part of something bigger than herself. They'll be there, Rosa said, hanging up the phone. Kenny, Patricia, Antonio, Maria, and 6 others. But Nina, or Cassandra, they're scared. And they have every right to be. I know. And I'll tell them everything. No more lies, no more deception. Just the truth. Rosa studied her for a moment. You know, for a rich girl, you're not completely hopeless. Despite everything, Cassandra smiled. Is that your way of saying you trust me? It's my way of saying I trust that you want to do the right thing. Whether you can actually pull it off, well, we'll find out tomorrow. The basement meeting room of the Garden Street Community Center smelled like old coffee and industrial disinfectant. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across mismatched chairs arranged in a rough circle. Cassandra sat facing 9 Blake Industries workers, feeling more nervous than she'd ever felt in any corporate boardroom. Kenny sat directly across from her, his arms crossed and his expression skeptical. Patricia was beside him, her mouth set in a hard line. Antonio kept checking his watch as if he regretted coming. Maria wouldn't meet her eyes at all. So, Kenny said, breaking the tense silence. Rosa says you have something to tell us. Something about who you really are. Cassandra looked around the circle, seeing suspicion and wariness in every face. These were people who'd shared their lunch breaks with her, who'd taught her the best ways to clean stubborn stains, who trusted her with their complaints and fears. My name isn't Nina Parker, she began, her voice steadier than she felt. It's Cassandra Blake. Harold Blake is my father. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Antonio stood up so fast his chair scraped against the concrete floor. Are you kidding me right now? You're his daughter? Patricia's voice was sharp with betrayal. You've been spying on us this whole time? It's not what you think, Cassandra said quickly. Really? Kenny leaned forward, his voice dangerous. Because what I think is that Daddy's little princess wanted to play dress-up and see how the workers live. Get some good stories to tell at your fancy parties. No, Cassandra said firmly. Let me tell you why I really did this. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice growing stronger as she continued. 3 years ago, I graduated from Wharton with an MBA. I thought I was ready to help run my father's company, to make a real difference. But every time I tried to get involved, I was shut out. Told I didn't understand real business, real people, real problems. She looked directly at Kenny. My father said I'd lived in a bubble my entire life. And he was right. I had no idea what was actually happening in his company. I was making assumptions about worker complaints and executive decisions based on sanitized reports and polished presentations. Maria finally looked up. So you decided to come slumming with the poor people? I decided to learn the truth, Cassandra replied. But it became so much more than that. She pulled out her phone and began showing them the evidence she'd collected. Look at these memos. Look at these recordings. Your complaints aren't reaching my father. They're being filtered out by executives who don't want him to know what's really happening. Patricia took the phone, scrolling through photos of documents. This memo about easily replaceable workers. This is from Thomas Crawford's office? I found it in his trash, along with detailed plans for the layoffs they're announcing tomorrow. Antonio sat back down, his anger shifting to interest. What layoffs? 30% of the workforce. They're targeting older workers, minorities, anyone they think won't fight back. And they're creating false performance reviews to justify it. The room fell silent as the workers absorbed this information. Rosa, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. There's something else you all need to know about Cassandra. Something I learned today that changes everything. Cassandra looked at her in confusion. What do you mean? Rosa stood and walked to the front of the room. How many of you remember Helen Morrison? Several hands went up. Kenny nodded. She used to work in shipping. Retired about 5 years ago. Helen was my grandmother, Rosa said quietly. She told me stories about the early days of Blake Industries. About how Harold Blake's father, Robert Blake, built the company. Patricia frowned. What does this have to do with anything? Rosa looked directly at Cassandra. Tell them about your grandfather, Cassandra. Tell them about Robert Blake. Cassandra felt her stomach tighten. She rarely talked about her grandfather, partly because her father rarely talked about him. He founded the company in 1962, built it from a small manufacturing business into what it is today. That's the sanitized version, Rosa said. Helen told me the real story. Robert Blake started the company with money he borrowed from black church congregations in Newark. Promised them jobs, promised them a piece of the American dream. Cassandra felt the color drain from her face. She'd never heard this story. For the first 10 years, it worked, Rosa continued. Robert Blake kept his promises. He hired from the community, paid fair wages, promoted based on merit regardless of color. My grandmother was one of his first supervisors. Kenny leaned forward. What happened? Robert Blake died in 1974. Heart attack at 52. Harold was only 25 when he took over the company. Rosa looked at Cassandra. Your father inherited a business built on promises to the black community. But over the years, those promises were forgotten. Cassandra felt like the floor was shifting beneath her feet. I never knew any of this. Of course you didn't, Maria said, but her tone was less hostile now. They don't teach that history in business school. Rosa sat back down. Helen always said Robert Blake would be ashamed of what the company became. The way workers are treated now, the discrimination, the broken promises. She used to say the company lost its soul when it forgot where it came from. Antonio was staring at Cassandra with new understanding. So when you came here, working as a janitor, you were. I was trying to understand what my grandfather built, Cassandra said quietly. I was trying to figure out how we lost our way. The room was quiet for several minutes. Finally, Kenny spoke. You know what this means, right? If what Rosa is saying is true, your family owes a debt to this community that was never paid. Cassandra nodded, the weight of this revelation settling over her. You're right. We do. Patricia was still looking through the evidence on Cassandra's phone. These documents, they're real? Everything is real. And there's more. Recorded conversations where executives mock employee concerns. Evidence of safety violations being covered up. Financial records showing money being diverted from worker benefits to executive bonuses. Why are you showing us this? Antonio asked. What do you want from us? Cassandra stood, facing the circle of workers who held her future in their hands. I want you to come to the board meeting tomorrow. I want you to speak truth to power. I want you to demand the respect and dignity that my grandfather promised your community and that my father's executives have stolen from you. And what happens to you? Kenny asked. When you expose all this, when you go against your own father's executives? I don't know, Cassandra admitted. Maybe he'll fire me. Maybe he'll cut me off completely. Maybe he'll choose his executives over his daughter. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not after everything I've seen, everything I've learned. Rosa stood and walked over to Cassandra. You know, Helen used to tell me stories about Robert Blake. Said he was a man who kept his word, who treated everyone with respect regardless of their station in life. I wish I could have met him, Cassandra said softly. Maybe you can't meet him, Rosa replied, but you can honor him. You can try to bring back what he built. Patricia closed the phone and handed it back to Cassandra. If we do this, if we show up at that board meeting, we need to know you're serious. We need to know you won't back down when things get ugly. Cassandra looked around the circle, meeting each person's eyes. 2 weeks ago, I was a privileged woman who'd never worked an honest day in her life. But working alongside all of you, learning your stories, seeing your strength and dignity in the face of injustice, it changed me. You changed me. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. I can't promise you that tomorrow will go the way we want. I can't promise you that my father will choose justice over profit. But I can promise you that I'll stand with you, whatever happens. Because you've shown me what real courage looks like. Kenny was the first to stand. I'm in. Patricia followed. Me too. One by one, the workers stood, their decision made. As they began planning for tomorrow's confrontation, Cassandra felt something she'd never experienced before. She wasn't just the heir to a fortune anymore. She was part of a community, part of a fight for justice that was bigger than any corporate bottom line. Tomorrow, they would walk into that boardroom together. And whatever happened, they would face it as one. The corporate tower's lobby was buzzing with its usual morning energy. Executives in tailored suits strode purposefully toward elevators, their phones pressed to their ears, their minds focused on profit margins and quarterly projections. None of them noticed the small group of workers gathering near the building's side entrance. Cassandra stood with Rosa, Kenny, Patricia, Antonio, and 5 other Blake Industries employees in a circle behind a delivery truck that shielded them from view. The contrast was stark. She wore her usual executive attire, a navy blazer and pressed slacks, while they were dressed in their best clothes, the kind reserved for job interviews and church services. Everyone remember the plan? Rosa asked quietly, checking her watch. The board meeting would begin in 2.5 hours. Kenny adjusted his tie nervously. We wait for your signal, then take the service elevator to the 42nd floor. Patricia has the employee badges that will get us past the first security checkpoint. And if they try to stop us? Asked Maria, a woman in her 40s who worked quality control and had never spoken up in a meeting before today. Then we remind them that this is our company too, Cassandra said firmly. These aren't their jobs to give and take at will. You've earned your place at that table. Patricia studied Cassandra's face. You're different today. Calmer. I know who I am now, Cassandra replied. For the first time in my life, I know exactly where I belong. Antonio shifted his weight. I still can't believe we're doing this. Walking into a boardroom full of millionaires to tell them they're wrong. They're not millionaires, Rosa said with a slight smile. They're employees, just like us. The only difference is they wear more expensive suits and have forgotten what it means to work for a living. Kenny laughed despite his nerves. When you put it like that, it doesn't sound so scary. It should be scary, Cassandra said seriously. What we're doing today could change everything. But sometimes change requires courage to do what's right, even when it's frightening. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Maria spoke up. "I want to tell you all something," she said, her voice soft but determined. "Last night, my daughter asked me why I looked worried. I told her I was going to speak up at work today, try to make things better for people like us." She paused, tears gathering in her eyes. She said she was proud of me. Said she'd never seen me stand up for myself before. And she was right. I've spent 15 years keeping my head down, accepting whatever they gave me, grateful just to have a job. Patricia reached over and squeezed Maria's hand. "We all have. But not anymore," Maria continued. "Today, my daughter will see that her mother is brave. That she's worth fighting for." Kenny nodded. "My grandmother always told me that respect isn't something you get by asking nicely. You get it by demanding it." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," Cassandra said. "She was a lot like Rosa's grandmother Helen, actually. Worked for decades in jobs that never appreciated her, but she never stopped believing that things could be better." Kenny looked around the circle. "I think she'd be proud of what we're doing today." Antonio, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, Cassandra. About your grandfather's promises to our community. My father worked for Blake Industries back in the 70s. Used to come home talking about how Mr. Robert treated everyone with respect." "What happened to your father?" Cassandra asked. "He died 5 years ago. Cancer. Couldn't afford the best treatment because the health insurance got worse and worse over the years." Antonio's voice was steady, but his pain was clear. He always said the company changed after Robert Blake died. Said the heart went out of it. Cassandra felt the weight of that legacy, the responsibility of generations of broken promises. "I'm sorry about your father. And I'm sorry it took so long for someone from my family to listen." "You're listening now," Rosa said. "That's what matters." As they talked, something beautiful was happening. The barriers that usually separated workers from ownership, that divided people by class and education and background, were dissolving. They were no longer a billionaire's daughter and a group of employees. They were allies, friends, people who had found common ground in their shared commitment to justice. "Can I ask you something?" Patricia said to Cassandra. "When this is over, when the board meeting is done and the dust settles, what happens to us? Do you go back to your executive life and we go back to our shifts?" Cassandra considered the question carefully. "I hope not. I hope what we've built together is stronger than that. I hope we've started something that will outlast whatever happens in that boardroom today." "What do you mean?" Kenny asked. "I mean that maybe it's time Blake Industries remembered what it was supposed to be. A company that lifts up communities instead of exploiting them. A place where hard work is respected and rewarded, regardless of the color of your skin or the size of your paycheck." Rosa smiled. "You sound like your grandfather." "I hope so. I hope he'd be proud of what we're trying to do." Maria wiped her eyes. "You know what I realized? We're not just fighting for our jobs today. We're fighting for our dignity. For the right to be seen as human beings instead of just numbers on a spreadsheet. And we're fighting for the next generation," Antonio added. "So our kids don't have to accept the kind of treatment we've been getting." Patricia nodded. "My daughter wants to be an engineer. I want her to work for a company that will value her mind, not just tolerate her presence." As the morning sun climbed higher, warming the spring air, the group continued sharing stories. Kenny talked about his dreams of opening his own business someday. Rosa described her hopes for her daughter's education. Antonio shared memories of his father's pride in honest work. And Cassandra listened, really listened, in a way she'd never learned to do in corporate meetings or charity galas. She understood now that her wealth and privilege meant nothing if they weren't used to lift others up. She understood that real leadership wasn't about commanding from above, but about standing beside people in their struggles. "There's something I need you all to know," Cassandra said as 9:30 approached. "Whatever happens in that boardroom, you've already changed me forever. You've shown me what courage looks like, what integrity means, what it feels like to be part of something bigger than yourself." "You've changed us too," Rosa replied. "You could have stayed in your comfortable office, pretending everything was fine. Instead, you chose to see the truth, even when it was ugly. Kenny checked his phone. It's time. They gathered their materials. The folder of evidence Cassandra had compiled, the personal statements each worker had prepared, the documentation of years of discrimination and exploitation. But more than paperwork, they carried with them a sense of purpose that couldn't be quantified in quarterly reports. As they walked toward the building's entrance, Cassandra felt a hand slip into hers. It was Maria, who had been the most hesitant about trusting her. "Thank you," Maria said quietly, "for seeing us, for hearing us, for standing with us." One by one, the others joined hands until they formed a chain of connection that stretched across differences in background and education and experience. In that moment, they weren't employer and employees, weren't rich and poor, weren't different colors or classes. They were people who had found each other, who had chosen justice over comfort, who had decided that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the cost. "Ready?" Cassandra asked, looking around at faces that had become so dear to her. "Ready," they replied in unison. Together, they walked into the building that would either embrace the change they represented, or try to crush it. But whatever happened, they would face it together, bound by a trust that had been earned through honesty and sealed with courage. The real battle was about to begin. The mahogany boardroom was a temple to corporate power. 20-foot windows offered a commanding view of the city below, while oil paintings of company founders lined the walls. 12 leather chairs surrounded a gleaming conference table that could have fed a family of 4 for months with what it cost. Cassandra sat in her usual spot near the head of the table, her heart pounding as board members filed in. Distinguished men and women in expensive suits, most of whom had known her since childhood, took their seats with the casual confidence of people accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Harold Blake entered last, wearing his charcoal suit like armor. He moved to his position at the head of the table with the bearing of a man who had never doubted his right to be there. "Good morning, everyone," Harold began, settling into his chair. "We have several important items on today's agenda, beginning with Thomas Crawford's presentation on operational efficiency improvements." Thomas stood, pulling up a PowerPoint presentation on the wall-mounted screen. His first slide read, "Workforce Optimization Strategy, Maximizing Profitability Through Strategic Reduction." "As you can see," Thomas began, his voice smooth and confident, "we've identified significant opportunities to reduce operational costs while maintaining production levels. Our analysis indicates that a 30% reduction in workforce, focused primarily on higher-cost employees, will increase quarterly profits by 18%. Cassandra watched the board members nod approvingly as Thomas outlined his plan. Charts and graphs reduced human lives to data points. Families became statistics. Decades of loyal service were dismissed as inefficient resource allocation. "The beauty of this approach," Andrew Holbrook added, standing to support Thomas's presentation, "is that we can frame these reductions as performance-based. We've already begun documenting performance issues that will provide legal justification for the terminations." Board member Margaret Thornton, a severe woman in her 60s, leaned forward. "What about potential pushback from employees? Union organizing attempts?" Thomas smiled coldly. "We've identified potential troublemakers and will address them in the first wave of terminations. Remove the leaders, and the rest will fall in line." "Excellent strategy," agreed board member William Foster. "Clean, efficient, and legally defensible." Rosa squeezed her hand. "No, you didn't. You showed courage. You told the truth. That matters, even if they wouldn't listen." But as the elevator descended toward the ground floor, carrying them away from the seats of power forever, Cassandra wondered if courage and truth were enough when facing such entrenched corruption and indifference. The fight was far from over, but they had lost this battle decisively. And the cost had been higher than any of them had imagined. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything. What would you do next in their situation? Let me know in the comments. The spring morning had turned gray and drizzly, matching the mood of the small group standing on the sidewalk outside the corporate tower. Cassandra sat on a concrete bench, still in shock from what had just happened. Around her, the workers who had risked everything spoke in hushed, defeated tones. 15 years, Rosa said quietly, staring up at the building where she'd spent most of her adult working life. 15 years, and they threw me out like garbage. Kenny kicked at a loose piece of concrete. At least you lasted 15 years. I'll be lucky if I can find another job after this. Word gets around. Patricia checked her phone for the third time in 5 minutes. My supervisor just texted. I'm being terminated effective immediately. Violation of company policy regarding unauthorized access to confidential meetings. One by one, the others received similar messages. Antonio, Maria, all of them fired within an hour of leaving the boardroom. Their courage had cost them their livelihoods. This is my fault, Cassandra said, her voice hollow. I convinced you all to trust me, and now you've lost everything. We made our own choices, Rosa replied firmly, sitting beside her. Nobody forced us to walk into that room. But I should have known this would happen. I should have had a better plan, a way to protect you. Stop, Maria said sharply. Just stop. We're not your responsibility, Cassandra. We're grown adults who decided to stand up for what's right. If that costs us our jobs, so be it. But even as Maria spoke those brave words, Cassandra could see the fear in her eyes. These people had families, mortgages, children who needed food and clothing and medical care. Noble principles didn't pay bills. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. Through the tinted windows, Cassandra could see Thomas Crawford in the passenger seat, talking animatedly on his phone. Probably calling other companies, warning them not to hire any of the troublemakers who had dared to challenge Blake Industries. They're going to blacklist all of us, Kenny said, following her gaze. Make sure we can't find work anywhere. Cassandra stood abruptly. No, they're not. What do you mean? Rosa asked. I mean I'm not done fighting. We lost this battle, but the war isn't over. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. When the call connected, she spoke with more authority than she'd felt in months. This is Cassandra Blake. I need to speak with Jennifer Walsh immediately. Jennifer Walsh was the most feared investigative journalist in the tri-state area, known for her exposés of corporate corruption. She and Cassandra had met at several charity events over the years. Jennifer? This is Cassandra Blake. I have a story for you. The biggest corporate scandal you've ever covered. The diner was a throwback to the 1950s, with red vinyl booths and black and white checkered floors. It was the kind of place that served honest food to working people, the opposite of the sterile corporate environments where Cassandra usually met with media contacts. Jennifer Walsh looked exactly like what she was, a journalist who had spent 20 years digging through corporate lies. Short gray hair, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a recorder that she placed on the table between them. So let me understand this correctly, Jennifer said, reviewing the documents Cassandra had provided. You spent 6 months working undercover as a janitor in your own father's company? That's right. And you documented systematic wage theft, discriminatory practices, and deliberate suppression of worker complaints? All of it's there. Recordings, memos, financial documents showing executive bonuses while worker benefits were cut. Jennifer studied the evidence with the focused attention of someone who knew how to spot genuine scandal from manufactured outrage. This is explosive material, Cassandra. If I publish this story, it won't just hurt your father's executives. It will destroy your relationship with your family permanently. Cassandra had been thinking about that exact point for the past 2 hours. Publishing this story would be the final bridge burned, the last step away from everything she'd known her entire life. I understand that. Do you? Because once this goes public, there's no taking it back. Your father will never forgive you. You'll be cut off from the Blake fortune forever. You'll be starting over with nothing. Rosa, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. She won't have nothing. She'll have us. Jennifer looked around the table at the workers who had been fired for their courage. With all due respect, your support isn't going to pay for her apartment on the Upper East Side. Then I'll find a different apartment, Cassandra said simply. And live how? On what income? You've never worked a real job in your life. Yes, I have, Cassandra replied. I worked as a janitor for 6 months. I learned how to clean offices, empty trash, scrub floors. It's honest work, and if that's what I need to do to support myself, then that's what I'll do." Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "You're serious about this?" "Completely serious." "Why? Why are you willing to give up everything?" Cassandra was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the question. When she answered, her voice was steady and certain. "Because I found out who my grandfather really was. Robert Blake built this company on promises to the community. He borrowed money from people who trusted him, who believed he would create opportunities for their children and grandchildren." She looked around the table at Rosa, Kenny, Patricia, and the others. "These people are the grandchildren of the families who trusted my grandfather. They've kept their side of the bargain. They've worked hard, been loyal, contributed to the company's success. And we betrayed them." "Your father betrayed them," Jennifer corrected. "You weren't part of those decisions. I was part of them by staying silent, by accepting the privilege that came from their exploitation, by choosing comfort over justice." Jennifer made notes on her pad. "What do you hope to accomplish with this story?" "I want people to know the truth. I want other companies to see that there are consequences for treating workers like disposable resources. And I want the Blake Industries employees to know that someone in the Blake family sees their worth. And if your father offers to make a deal, promises reforms in exchange for your silence." Cassandra thought about her father's face in the boardroom, the cold fury when he'd ordered her removed from the building. "He won't. He's chosen his executives over his daughter, profits over people. He's made his choice clear. So you're making yours." "I made it the moment I decided to become Nina Parker. Everything since then has just been following through." Jennifer closed her notebook and turned off her recorder. "I'll need to verify some of these documents independently, interview other sources. But if everything checks out, this story will run in Wednesday's edition." As Jennifer left, the workers sat in silence, processing what had just happened. In less than 48 hours, their story would be front-page news across the country. "You know there's no going back now," Rosa said gently. Cassandra nodded. "I know. Are you scared?" Kenny asked. "Terrified," Cassandra admitted. "I've never been on my own before. I don't know how to live without the safety net I've always had." Patricia reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not on your own. We're family now. But I cost you all your jobs." "You gave us our dignity," Maria corrected. "For the first time in years, we stood up and demanded to be treated like human beings. That's worth more than any paycheck." Cassandra felt tears starting again, but these were different from the tears of defeat she'd shed earlier. These were tears of gratitude, of belonging, of finally understanding what it meant to be part of something larger than herself. "What do we do now?" she asked. Rosa smiled. "Now we wait for the story to break. And then we figure out how to build something better from the ashes of what we've torn down." Outside, the afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting golden light through the diner's windows. For the first time since this whole journey began, Cassandra felt genuinely hopeful about the future. She had lost everything she thought mattered. But she had gained something infinitely more valuable, a purpose worth fighting for, and people worth fighting alongside. The choice was made. Now came the hard work of living with it. Cassandra woke on Rosa's couch to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. Sunlight streamed through the yellow kitchen curtains, and the smell of coffee filled the small apartment. She'd been staying with Rosa for 2 days, sleeping on the same couch where she'd first revealed her true identity just a week ago. "The story's out," Rosa called from the kitchen, holding up a newspaper. Front page of the Tribune. The headline read in bold letters, "Billionaire's daughter exposes massive corruption at family company." Below it was a photo of Cassandra in her janitor's uniform next to another photo of her in executive attire. Cassandra's phone continued buzzing with calls from reporters, lawyers, and numbers she didn't recognize. She turned it face down and joined Rosa at the small kitchen table. "How do you feel?" Rosa asked, pouring coffee into a chipped but clean mug. "Strangely calm," Cassandra replied. scanning Jennifer Walsh's article. It was thorough and devastating, laying out every piece of evidence with the precision of a surgeon. Like I can finally breathe. The apartment door opened, and Kenny walked in carrying a stack of newspapers from different outlets. This story is everywhere. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, The Wall Street Journal. Everyone's covering it. Patricia arrived 15 minutes later with Antonio and Maria, all of them carrying newspapers and looking stunned by the media attention. They gathered around Rosa's kitchen table, which suddenly seemed too small to contain the magnitude of what was happening. My phone hasn't stopped ringing, Patricia said. Reporters want to interview all of us. Mine too, Kenny added. But also something else. I got 3 job offers this morning. 3. Companies saying they want to hire workers who have the courage to stand up for what's right. Maria looked amazed. I got 2 calls from union organizers. They want to help us file formal complaints against Blake Industries. As they talked, Cassandra's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a number she recognized. Blake Industries corporate headquarters. It's my father, she said quietly. The room fell silent. Rosa reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You don't have to answer it. Cassandra looked around at the faces of people who had become her chosen family. They had given her the strength to tell the truth. Now she needed to face the consequences. Yes, I do. She answered the call. Hello, Dad. Cassandra. Harold's voice was strained, exhausted. We need to talk. I don't think there's anything left to say. There's everything left to say. Can you come to the office? Cassandra almost laughed. Dad, you had me banned from the building, remember? I'm lifting that ban. Please. Give me 1 hour. Something in his voice stopped her from hanging up. It wasn't the commanding tone she'd heard her entire life. It was the voice of a man who had been broken by revelations he never saw coming. 1 hour, she agreed. The same boardroom where everything had fallen apart 2 days ago felt different now. Smaller somehow, less intimidating. Harold sat alone at the massive table, looking older than Cassandra had ever seen him. The newspapers were spread in front of him, each one telling the story of his company's corruption. Sit down, please, he said without looking up. Cassandra took the same chair she'd occupied as his daughter, before she became the whistleblower who exposed his executive's crimes. Thomas resigned this morning, Harold said finally. So did Andrew. And Rebecca from HR. Good. The board is demanding a complete overhaul of company policies. The Department of Labor is launching an investigation. We're facing class action lawsuits from current and former employees. Cassandra waited. She wasn't here to comfort him or help him manage the crisis. I've been reading the evidence you collected, Harold continued, his voice barely above a whisper. The memos, the recordings, the documented discrimination. Did I really not know any of this was happening? You didn't want to know, Cassandra replied honestly. You trusted the wrong people and never questioned why employee complaints stopped reaching your desk. Harold finally looked at her, and she was shocked to see tears in his eyes. Your grandfather would be ashamed of what I let this company become. Yes, he would. Rosa Martinez's grandmother Helen worked for my father, didn't she? For 20 years. She helped build this company when it actually stood for something. Harold was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the city below. I want to make this right, Cassandra. I want to honor what my father built. But I don't know how. Start by listening to the workers. Really listening, not just pretending to care during photo opportunities. Will you help me? The question caught her off guard. Help you. Come back to the company. Take a real position, not a ceremonial role. Help me rebuild what we've broken. Cassandra studied her father's face, looking for signs of manipulation or empty promises. But what she saw was genuine remorse and a desperate desire to repair the damage. I can't come back as your daughter trying to prove herself, she said carefully. If I come back, it's as someone who represents the workers' interests. Someone who makes sure promises are kept. What would that look like? A new position. Vice President of Worker Relations. Direct access to you, full authority to investigate complaints, power to implement changes. And I want Rosa Martinez as my deputy. She understands this company better than any of your executives ever did. Harold nodded slowly. What else? Full reinstatement of everyone who was fired for speaking up. Back pay for all wage theft documented in my evidence. A commitment to hiring and promoting based on merit, not favoritism. And a worker representative on the board of directors. The board will resist some of those changes. Then convince them. Or find new board members. Harold stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street where his daughter had been born into privilege but had chosen justice instead. There's something else I need to tell you, he said. I found some of your grandfather's old papers in the company archives. Letters he wrote to the families who helped him start this business. Promises he made about creating a company that would lift up entire communities. He turned back to her. He would be proud of you, Cassandra, for having the courage to hold us accountable to his vision. For the first time in years, Cassandra felt a genuine connection to her father. Not the desperate need for approval that had driven her for so long, but an adult partnership based on shared values. There's one more thing, she said. I want to establish the Robert Blake Foundation. Funded by company profits, focused on education and job training for workers' families. Your father's legacy should be about building people up, not just building wealth. Harold smiled for the first time since she'd entered the room. He would have loved that. Cassandra walked through the same factory floor where she'd first learned about the real Blake Industries, but everything had changed. The break room had new furniture and a functioning microwave. Safety equipment was up to date. Most importantly, there was a different energy among the workers. Confidence instead of fear, pride instead of resignation. Rosa approached, wearing a navy blazer over her work clothes and carrying a tablet full of worker feedback forms. As Deputy Vice President of Worker Relations, she'd become one of the most respected voices in the company. The afternoon shift wants to talk about the new health insurance options, Rosa said. They're impressed with the coverage, but they want to make sure the dental benefits extend to part-time workers too. Schedule a meeting for Friday, Cassandra replied. We'll make sure everyone's covered. Kenny jogged over from the loading dock, grinning widely. He'd been promoted to shift supervisor and was taking night classes in business management, paid for by the Robert Blake Foundation. The union vote results are in, he announced. 87% in favor. We're officially organized. Instead of fighting unionization, Blake Industries had embraced it, working with union representatives to create fair contracts and efficient grievance procedures. It was a radical change from the previous administration's approach, but productivity and worker satisfaction had both increased dramatically. Patricia approached with her teenage daughter in tow. Cassandra, I want you to meet my daughter Jennifer. She's starting her internship in the engineering department next week. Jennifer was a bright-eyed 17-year-old with her mother's determination and her own dreams of innovation. Thank you for making this possible, she said. My mom told me how things used to be here. Thank your mom, Cassandra replied. She's the one who had the courage to speak up when it mattered. As the day shift ended and workers headed home to families they could now support with dignity, Cassandra stood in the lobby where a new plaque had been installed. It read, "In memory of Robert Blake, 1922 to 1974, who believed that a company's true wealth is measured not in profits, but in the prosperity of the people who make those profits possible." Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. Board meeting tomorrow to discuss expanding the foundation to our West Coast facilities. Your grandfather's vision is spreading. Cassandra smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. She'd lost a fortune but gained a purpose. She'd given up privilege but found belonging. She'd stopped being Harold Blake's daughter and become something far more valuable. A bridge between worlds, a voice for justice, a keeper of promises that should never have been broken. Outside, Rosa was waiting by the employee entrance, car keys in hand. Ready to go home? Home. Not to a luxury apartment bought with inherited wealth, but to a modest place in Newark that she shared with Rosa's family. Home to people who valued her for who she had become, not who she had been born to be. Ready, Cassandra replied. As they drove through the streets of Newark, past the churches and community centers where her grandfather had first made his promises, Cassandra felt the deep satisfaction that comes from work that matters. She had kept faith with the past, fought for justice in the present, and built hope for the future. The billionaire's daughter who had disguised herself as a janitor had discovered something worth more than any inheritance. The power to change lives, the strength that comes from standing with others, and the unshakable knowledge that sometimes the most important battles are won not by those born to privilege, but by those brave enough to use their privilege for justice. The circle was complete. The promises were being kept. And the real work was just beginning. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.